What is up, YouTube? What's going on, fellow fantasy people? And as always, what is up, the Catch fam? Okay, so I just want to break into kind of my initial fantasy reactions for my two primary leagues, my 12-man team, or not my 12-man team, my 12-man league, and my 20-man league as well. So we did okay. Some concerns, but overall, I feel pretty good about both of these rosters, right? So, obviously, Lamar Jackson still hasn't played in this matchup versus my co-host, Steven. I've put up just under 100 points. He's looking at 83.66 points, and he still has Mark Andrews. So, I do feel like we can hold on, and, anytime Mark Andrews is, potentially getting any fantasy points, well, Lamar Jackson will also be getting fantasy points because he is the one throwing the football to Mark Andrews. So I'm not really concerned in any way about losing this matchup. But quite an interesting week one overall. I don't want to get into all of my reactions. I'm going to wait till I can film with Steven for some more of our week one reactions, and we might wait until after Monday night just in case. But yeah, man, Christian McCaffrey played excellent. I mean, didn't even score a touchdown, right? And had over 23 fantasy points in this league. If you play in full PPR, which, this is a half PPR league, then Christian McCaffrey had an even better day, right? David Montgomery, guy that I harped on all off season and all preseason as my favorite value in the entire draft, arguably, had an excellent game against an extremely, extremely difficult Rams defense. 108 rushing yards, a touchdown, and 10 receiving yards. I look for him to improve on those numbers throughout the season. Loved to see that performance by David Montgomery, like I said, against a very, very good defense. Antonio Brown, we've already talked about, had an excellent game on Thursday, right? So we don't need to go over that. Laviska Shenault Jr., not the exact game I was really hoping for. I mean, in full PPR, he did put up over 10 points. If he had scored a touchdown, then this would have been a really good stat line. So I'm not necessarily too concerned about this, being that we do have Corey Davis on our bench, who we'll get to in just a moment, right? But overall, a really surprising outcome, right, in that Houston-Jacksonville game, right? Houston looked quite good in comparison to Jacksonville, and Trevor Lawrence did struggle quite a bit in his debut. He made some throws that were not quite good at all, but he still showed a lot of promise and some poise, and an overall loss as well. We did see both DJ Chark and Marvin Jones score a touchdown, so that is promising. But speaking of the same game, James Robinson, a guy who I had been as high on arguably as I was on David Montgomery, a very bad game overall. No 2 cents about it, nothing to try and cover up here. He had a bad game, but part of that was the overall game script, right? This was a game where Jacksonville was playing from behind essentially the entire game, and it was hard to get James Robinson involved, although I would have liked to see him utilized a little bit more maybe in the passing game, but he did have 29 receiving yards, right? But only 25 rushing yards and not a single touchdown. So I will chop part of this up to game script overall. He's got Denver next week, an okay matchup, followed by Arizona, who may very well be the sleeper defense of the year, Cincinnati, Tennessee, and Miami. So throughout these first 6 weeks, I definitely look for him to improve. I wouldn't freak out. I have heard some buzz about how this has more to do with Urban Meyer not wanting James Robinson as the RB1 and wanting Travis Etienne in there and all that stuff. But I don't think it has anything to do with that. I think that it was definitely game script. And as this points out, he did have a pretty good role as a receiver, right? I mean, we're looking at David Montgomery, who only had 10 receiving yards. I mean, James Robinson had 29 receiving yards, right? Christian McCaffrey is his own beast, so we're not even going to use that comparison. But overall, I would chop most of this up to game script. I'm not going to lie. It's slightly alarming, but I think he will definitely improve in the coming weeks. Okay, let's bounce back to the tight end position, man. Mike Gaseki. If you guys have been following this channel, you guys know how high I have been on Mike Gaseki, and there are some other tight ends out there who I've been high on who didn't have the best Sunday afternoon, right? This was a really, really weird game for Mike Gaseki. I mean, 2 targets, which it's not even showing. It's just going over his preseason, his last preseason game he played in. But yeah, he did have 2 targets in this game. Not a very high scoring affair, but nonetheless, man, we didn't see anything out of Mike Gesicki. A true goose egg. I mean, uh, think about how much better my overall points would look if he even had 5 points. I am slightly concerned about this. But I don't want to press the panic button, right? At the tight end position, we do see this happen, even with notable tight ends. Maybe not as bad as a goose egg, but we see games where they are just not really involved. But overall, I mean, I think that New England played pretty well defensively, right? I think Tua did some good things, but overall, this game just wasn't a lights out game for the Miami Dolphins, right? They get Buffalo next week, who looked pretty good defensively, actually, and then Las Vegas, Indianapolis, Tampa Bay, Jacksonville, Atlanta, Buffalo again, and Houston in the coming weeks. So he's going to have some opportunities to improve on this, but I'm not going to lie when I say that I may be looking at some other tight end options just in case on the waiver wire while it's early in the season. But nonetheless, Matt Gay, kicker of the LA Rams. Remember, in our draft, we did not draft a kicker. We drafted an extra player and threw him on IR immediately, then went out and put in a waiver. And look at this, man. We still had a 12-point kicker in comparison to Steven. We had the win at the kicker position, right? So we feel really good about that. I look for the Rams to continue to have these games where they're putting up 30-plus points. They've got Indianapolis, Tampa Bay, Arizona, Seattle, the Giants, Detroit Lions, Houston, Tennessee. So Matt Gay in the coming weeks is going to have some very good games. I'm really happy with that pickup overall. The Rams defense, of course, played very well, and this was a tough defense for me to root for. I had them against me in my 20-man league. The catch fam roster, which we'll do a separate video on with Steven, had the Rams defense against them as well. And overall, I was happy that they hung in there at 8 points. I wouldn't have mind seeing 10 points or so, as I don't really think it would have affected any of my other matchups, but it did affect things. And on top of that, we had David Montgomery playing. So it was kind of back and forth for me in terms of rooting for them. But overall, I'm happy they still put up a good game overall and showed some really good promise as a dominant defense, man. They are not a force to be reckoned with. They have some tough matchups coming up, though. Indianapolis, Tampa Bay, Arizona, and Seattle over the next 4 weeks. So not the most promising matchups before they turn around and face the Giants, the Denver Broncos, Houston, and Tennessee. So regardless, this is a defense that you can start with confidence week in and week out. Okay, let's take a look at the bench very quickly. Kelvin Coleman did just about absolutely nothing in this game. That was our final pick of the draft, right? He did have 9 rushes overall, but I can say that I'm pretty much ready to move on from Kelvin Coleman, which is maybe it's a little too early to go ahead and, I don't want to say I'm hitting the panic button, but because we don't really care about this spot on our bench. I think that Kelvin Coleman could still break out and be a prominent rusher in that offense, especially if we see an injury happen down the line. But nonetheless, I think there are better options on the waiver wire at this given moment that I would rather, not even just at the running back position, but at other positions that I would rather add to this roster. Okay, so moving on, let's talk about another New York Jet. Corey Davis looked phenomenal. He looked like the wide receiver 1 in that offense that we expected him to be when we went out and drafted him, when we made him a prime target in both of our primary fantasy leagues, right? This was a guy that I talked about early and often on this channel, and I'm really happy to see him putting up those 2 touchdowns against a Carolina defense that played very, very well. And yet, Corey Davis was the only skill position player on this team to score a touchdown on Sunday. So that shows great promise moving forward at the receiver position as he gets New England, Denver, Tennessee, and Atlanta in the coming weeks. Some good matchups overall. New England really the only unfavorable matchup in the coming weeks, right? And if Stephon Gilmore does not play in that game, then we still have a pretty decent matchup overall. So really happy with how Corey Davis played. Retrospectively, of course, we would have liked to play him over Shenault Jr. I really had a strange feeling that Shenault Jr. was going to get in the red zone Sunday, and that did not happen at all. But nonetheless, man, just good to see that depth at the position on the bench with, in half PPR, just over 24 points. In full PPR, he had an even more explosive game. So we still have Gus Edwards on this roster, and that is going to allow us to automatically drop Gus Edwards and pick up a prime waiver wire addition, which we kind of did strategically. Just wanted to sit back and see how week 1 unfolded, and we have got some good waiver wire options coming up. Henry Ruggs, of course, hasn't played and still has an opportunity tonight to show that he is the wide receiver 1 in the Las Vegas offense. If he doesn't, then I don't know what we're going to do about Henry Ruggs, but we'll find out, right? Terrace Marshall Jr., not a great stat line overall, someone who I was really excited about, but he did have 6 targets. He secured 3 of them, and one of those targets was in the red zone. So I felt good just seeing that he got targeted in the red zone once, right? And keep in mind that this, not Corey Davis, that's not who we want, but this Carolina offense has some really, really good matchups coming up. I mean, New Orleans, Houston, Dallas, Philly, Minnesota, the Giants, Atlanta, right? So overall in the season, they have a very easy strength of schedule. And this is more similar to Javonte Williams. These are 2 rookies who are kind of stashing for now, looking as breakout candidates. If any injuries happen to either of these teams at the respective position, then these are 2 guys who are going to be filled in automatically. So let's talk about Javonte Williams. This is someone who we're still looking forward to down the road. Melvin Gordon made some plays against the Giants. He had that crazy 70-yard touchdown, right? But eventually down the season, I look for Javonte Williams to still emerge. So 45 rushing yards, still actually a pretty solid stat line if he got in the red zone. Would have been a pretty good stat line overall. So I'm not panicking whatsoever with either Terrace Marshall Jr. or Javonte Williams. So I'm not going to crack down Steven's team as that's his business to do when he wants to, if he even wants to. And I'll just leave it at that. But I will point out that we did tell a lot of you guys to start Brandon Ayuk, who ended up just not really playing. A really weird game, the Niners and the Lions, that we'll save to break down later. But nonetheless, man, let's move on to my 20-man roster, which, man, we were projected, to lose this game. Original projection says it was only by about a point, but for quite some time, we were projected to lose this game by a couple points, man. So really happy with how this squad showed up on Sunday. Tua, not the best game whatsoever, but in comparison to my opponent, who had Josh Allen, really not that bad of a game, right? And I would definitely like to see more out of Tua next week against Buffalo, who, like I said, played pretty well defensively, right? But he does have some favorable matchups in the coming weeks. And this is our guy, man. We're sticking with Tua time all throughout the season. Would have liked to see more than just 2 touchdowns, but this was a low-scoring affair. New England's defense played well overall. So there were a couple throws by Tua that I did not like, but overall, I think he had a good game considering the game script. Okay, Jerry Judy. This is my biggest blow overall so far in this entire fantasy season. I would say this is worse than Gus Edwards. Maybe not, because we could have picked Amari Cooper or Daryl Henderson, in my 12-man league over that of Gus Edwards, who we've lost for the entire season, less than 24 hours after we drafted him. But man, I was so high on Jerry Judy, who had an excellent game, man. 6 receptions for 72 yards, 13.20 points in this full PPR league, was on fire out there, looked great in conjunction with Tim Patrick and Cortland Sutton and those running backs. Teddy Two Gloves looked locked in, man. Teddy Bridgewater looked great yesterday. And man, it's just so sad. As soon as they cut, NFL Red Zone cut back and said that they were carting Jerry Judy off the field, I was devastated, man. I was devastated for the Catch fam, who I know I told a lot of you guys to go out and target Jerry Judy in your draft. But the good news is it is a high ankle sprain. The bad news is it is a high ankle sprain, right? So 4 to 6 weeks is the timeline at the moment, but ankle sprains can be a lingering injury. So I plan, on seeing Jerry Judy being put on IR, and I will move him to, my IR spot in this league, excuse me. But that was a giant blow for the fantasy community, of course. Hated seeing that happen. One of my favorite players going into the year, if not my favorite player going into the year. So shout out to Jerry Judy, man. You played excellent out there while you were out there. Thank you for getting us these 13 fantasy points, and we wish you a speedy recovery here at the catch. So in this league, I did start Corey Davis, which is quite interesting. I kind of had no choice, but I started Carolina's defense, right? But nonetheless, Corey Davis went off, man. We already talked about him, 26.70 fantasy points in this full PPR league. So we're very, very, very happy to see that. And really got nothing else to say except that he looks like the true wide receiver one in that offense. So at the running back position, man, we got some question marks in this 20-man league, and I'll chop it up to game script, but Aaron Jones and James Robinson combining for not even 13 fantasy points. A little bit alarming, but once again, Aaron Jones, the Green Bay Packers, no one really knows what that was. Probably the worst performance we've ever seen out of this unit of Aaron Rodgers, Davante Adams, and Aaron Jones, right? I think they'll bounce back. I truly do. They've got Detroit next week, so look for them to put up a lot of points. San Francisco looked pretty open to allowing teams to put up a lot of offensive points against them. So I think they've got two good matchups in the next 2 weeks, followed by a tough matchup at Pittsburgh and then Cincinnati and Chicago. So they're going to have some opportunity to bounce back, right? And I'll chop it up to game script. I truly will. There's just no way to get Aaron Jones involved in this game. I would have liked to see him maybe get some more, receiving yard work, as he only had 2 receptions in this game. But yeah, Green Bay was just playing from behind literally this entire game. I mean, that was one of the most surprising games. I wasn't surprised to see Jameis Winston play well, someone who I talked about a bit going into drafts, but I was surprised to see such a lopsided affair. And slightly alarming, but we still obviously pulled out the win and over 100 fantasy points. So we'll go ahead and hop to our third running back who we started in, that of Daryl Henderson, who I thought played really well. 70 rushing yards, a rushing touchdown, and 17 receiving yards. I saw some buzz out there saying that the Rams still need an answer at the running back position, but let's not forget Chicago is a pretty good team in terms of their front seven, right? And I thought Daryl Henderson showed a lot of flashes throughout that game. He's got, some pretty tough matchups, Indianapolis, Tampa Bay, and Arizona. But I would put those matchups maybe outside of Tampa Bay in pretty similar fashion to Chicago's front seven, right? And then he has, look at the backside of this, Seattle, the Giants, Detroit, Houston, Tennessee, and San Francisco. I wouldn't hit the panic button on Daryl Henderson whatsoever. I think he's going to have plenty opportunity this season to show a lot of promise. So the running back position, the biggest question mark looking at this team, as this is an RB heavy built team, right? And then obviously, of course, we've got a glaring hole at the receiver position, but we've got some promise on our bench overall. But let's talk about Jared Cook, man. Someone who I hit the panic button on quite early in the, in the preseason, right? Moving into week 1, I was ready to get any tight end. I made videos just about this, about any tight end I should add to this roster, and he had a really good stat line in terms of PPR. He had 5 receptions, 56 receiving yards. I'm really happy with that, right? And more importantly, he was getting targeted in the red zone heavily. He had at least 2 or 3 red zone targets. And I was really happy to see that Justin Herbert had good chemistry with Jared Cook and was targeting him in the red zone. At the moment, this is our tight end locked in. There are some other good tight ends on the waiver wire, right? But I like where Jared Cook is at. I like what I saw out of him against a good defense. Now he's got Dallas, Kansas City, the Las Vegas Raiders, Cleveland, Baltimore. Some tough matchups, don't get me wrong, but I think that he's going to put up some pretty good stat lines, right? Of course, we saw the injury to that of Ryan Fitzpatrick, but it looked like Heineke and that of Jared Cook had some pretty good chemistry as well. So I feel pretty good about him as our starting tight end in this 20-man league. Quick side note, Robert Tonyan, man, part of that lopsided affair with the Green Bay Packers, one of those other tight ends similar to Mike Gaseki, who I was so high on in this offseason. Very, very bad Sunday. So we'll talk about that a little bit later on in a separate video. But man, we saw some interesting stat lines come out of this last Sunday afternoon. So Brandon McManus had a solid day, put up 9 points for us, and Carolina's defense had a good day, putting up 9 points for us against the New York Jets. But don't forget, I dropped Arizona's defense against Tennessee in favor of Carolina's defense against the New York Jets. Made sense at the time, but retrospectively, of course, we were wrong on that one, man. I've already checked Arizona in this league, put up 16 points. I mean, didn't end up causing us a loss, but I don't know, man. I really have a good feeling about that Arizona defense. I've already put in a waiver to replace Carolina's defense with Arizona's defense. I think that they are going to be a team that is going to be a force to reckon with, be able to cause turnovers against good teams, and obviously get a lot of sacks throughout the year. Chandler Jones, man, what a day he had. Holy cow. So if you guys watched my live stream, I was going nuts about that. But nonetheless, man, Marquis Callaway on our bench, only 2.4 fantasy points and a that might be a little bit alarming in terms that we saw Marquis Callaway and Jameis Winston have such a good preseason together. But don't forget that Jair Alexander was on top of Marquis Callaway all day long. And, I do think when he has some easier matchups against weaker cornerbacks, he will start to perform a little bit better. So I'm fine with him on my bench overall. DJ Chark, a great day. 86 receiving yards, only 3 receptions, but a touchdown, right? So we like what we saw out of DJ Chark, who we didn't see a lot of in preseason. We didn't see him play with that of Trevor Lawrence. So I really like that stat line. He's got some promising matchups in the coming week, and we're going to need him with Jerry Judy going down, right? Rondelle Moore, speaking of the Arizona Cardinals, another player, a wide receiver 4, who looks like he could be replacing one of the receivers who my opponent started in, AJ Green. Rondelle Moore showed a lot of promise in this extremely high-flying Cardinals offense. Holy cow, did they light up the Titans, man. And they've got Minnesota and Jacksonville in the next 2 weeks. I look for Rondelle Moore to improve on these 4 receptions, 468 yards, a good stat line, and full PPR. If he can get into the end zone in the coming weeks and still garner this amount of targets and overall receiving yards, he is going to be a steal for us, right? So I like what we saw out of him. The most disappointing, fantasy player on our roster was that of Ramondre Stevenson, who did, kind of deal with an injury to his thumb, but he didn't look like he was involved in this game whatsoever. I might be pressing the panic button on Ramondre Stevenson already, but there are some waiver wire targets who I just think are more valuable at the moment. So we may very well be dropping that of Ramondre Stevenson just because we need some added depth at the receiver position, and we need added depth at the running back position with this kind of alarming Sunday we saw out of our running backs outside of our guy D. Tendy. So, yeah, man, just wanted to crack down the 2 primary fantasy rosters, kind of my initial reaction to how a lot of these guys played. We still got Lamar Jackson tonight, but this was a really interesting Sunday overall, man, and definitely going to be having some more updates on Sundays afternoon for you guys. Probably going to wait for my co-host Steven to really dive into things, but not just from a fantasy perspective, but from an actual football perspective as well. But nonetheless, man, Sunday was a blast. Let me know in the comments down below, what players did you start who are absolute duds for you? Which, out of those players, who did I tell you to start? I mean, Brandon Ayuk, Mike Gaseki, just looking at mine and Steven's lineup, 2 guys who we definitely said to start this, past Sunday. So let me know who you guys started, who went absolutely nuts, right? Maybe a Deebo Samuel, maybe a DeAndre Swift, right? Guys who we didn't really talk about at all. Let us know in the comments down below how your fantasy lineup looked, how you guys are looking moving into the final game of the week here on Monday night. As always, if you guys found this video enjoyable or helpful in any way, go ahead and smash the like button. Help give us that little boost excuse me, in the YouTube algorithm. And of course, man, we are on the road to 200 subscribers here at The Catch. Go ahead and hit that sub button, baby. You need a little bit of The Catch in your life day in and day out. So I thank you guys so much for watching and or listening, and remember, you saw it here on The Catch.